special episode. You're watching. Sorry, is my mic muted? Yeah, you're watching a special broadcast from The Wire, live from Delhi. We are discussing the ongoing situation in Nepal, in Kathmandu in particular, where for the past 24 to 48 hours, there have been mass protests. In the first phase that we saw yesterday, in other words, on Monday, you had large crowds of largely young people. These protesters were called the Gen Z protesters, who were upset about on the sort of continuing levels of corruption in Nepali politics and Nepali society, and had been voicing their concerns and opposition to this for days, if not weeks. And in order to shut down that discussion, the government of KP Sharma Oli imposed a ban on social media. And this simply led to a further snowballing of protests. And in these mass protests yesterday in Kathmandu, there was a terrible tragedy when the security forces, the police, opened fire, killing 19, perhaps 20 people, injuring scores more. This led to the resignation of the Home Minister in the Oli government, Mr. Ramesh Lekhak, and there was a hope on the part of the Prime Minister Oli that somehow this would put a lid on the protests and that the protests would subside. He also announced a withdrawal of the social media ban. However, since today, Tuesday, it's very clear that the situation has not, calmed down. In fact, protests continue in one shape or the other. The protests also seem to have taken new and deadlier manifestations. There have been targeted attacks on the residences of a number of politicians. We know that the personal homes of Prime Minister Oli and President Ramchandra Paudil were attacked, and there's some reports of them having been burnt. There are reports of protesters having gathered at the gates of the Singha Darbar, which is the seat of government, and before they were dispersed. And as things stand now, at 4 p.m. India time, 4:15 p.m. Kathmandu time, Nepal time, Prime Minister Sharma Oli has resigned. He's handed in his resignation to the president. There's talk of the army having evacuated him from his official residence in Baluwatar. And the situation remains volatile. The army has issued appeals for peace. And, to discuss the situation on the ground and what the events were that led up to the situation and where things might go from here, we are very fortunate to be joined by a young journalist, a young reporter from Kathmandu, Pranay, who is not only living and working there in Kathmandu, but he edits the Kalam newsletter, which is a sort of important newsletter. Nepal has a very vibrant digital media landscape, and his newsletter is one of the newsletters that gives a real inside view into what's happening in Nepal. Pranay, welcome to The Wire. It's unfortunate that we have you here today, your first appearance at a very difficult time for Kathmandu, for Nepal, and for you. I know that you've been on the streets covering the protests. Can you give us a snapshot of the situation on the ground as it is right now?
Hi, Siddharth. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here, even though it is at on such tragic terms. Right now, the situation on the ground has gone completely and totally out of control. There has been mass arson all across the city. Buildings have been set on fire. Policemen have been brutally dragged out of their police stations and murdered on the streets. Politicians have been attacked. There are videos circulating of former Prime Minister Sherbadu Deuba and our Foreign Minister Arzu Deuba being taken under control by the protesters, being beaten up. And this is happening all across the country, especially in Kathmandu, but also all across the country. The protests have gone completely and totally violent and out of control. And from what I've seen, I've spent all day just walking around the city, observing what's been going on. There are markedly fewer Gen Z protesters on the streets, unlike yesterday, where the protest was almost primarily young people under the age of 30 who are taking to the streets, protesting in very non-violent, creative ways. Today's protests have been, from the very beginning, it has been very violent. The protesters have especially taken aim at the security forces. the police, the APF, the Nepal army, even at times, and they've gone almost on a rampage. I just came from the streets right outside where I live. I witnessed a policeman being beaten to death right in front of me. And the protesters were also trying to burn down a van that was carrying three journalists who had their press vests on, who had their press passes and everything, but the protesters would not listen. They surrounded the van. They were attacking them. They were trying to burn it down. Me and a few others, we had to intervene and take them all out and rush them to safety. So it's very chaotic, and it is very unlike what the situation was like yesterday.
Yesterday we could make sense of the protests. As you said, they were creative, they were orderly, and of course the crackdown on them was brutal. But there were kids in uniforms, school uniforms. There was a clear sense in terms of people being fed up with levels of corruption, and I suspect somewhere behind those protests was a sense of fatigue and a sense of betrayal at the fact that over the last 10, 15 years that Nepali politics has been in transition. You could say more or less, in fact, for the last 25 years. I mean, 2001, after the Royal Palace massacre, then crystallized the whole demand for the end to monarchy and, for the Constituent Assembly, etc. There's been a kind of 2.5 decades of transition, but essentially, as far as the corruption of the political class, there seems to have been no letting up, and that seems to have triggered a very high degree of public frustration. Today, the protesters, however, seem to be, there doesn't seem to be that much of clarity in terms of what they want, right? I mean, these guys who were attacking the van or going after journalists, do you have any sense of what slogans they were shouting or what demands they have, or was it just kind of opportunistic violence? I mean, to what end, really?
Well, I think at the beginning, in the mornings when things were a little quieter, and the crowds are much smaller. At that time, the slogans were against the political class. They were asking Prime Minister KP Oli to leave the country. They were shouting slogans against all of our political leaders. But as the day went on, and as tensions escalated more and more, as the crowd gathered, it kind of I think it kind of lost its purpose. There wasn't a clear agenda or even a slogan that they wanted to pursue. It was basically just vandalism and violence for the sake of violence. Because I spoke to many people at the protests. I tried to get them to stop attacking. They were lobbing rocks at private residences, and I asked them not to do that. But then they were like, "No, we'll burn the country down." So I think it's gotten to a point where the frustration has kind of evolved into this all-pervasive anger at basically everything that's around them.
You mentioned earlier that the protests were not confined to Kathmandu or to the valley. Would you say, have you heard of similar protests or disturbances, say, from the Terai region, from the sort of Madhesi region, or elsewhere in the Pahadi, in the mountainous areas?
I'm not too sure about the Madhes region because I haven't really had a chance to, figure out what's going on everywhere.
Yeah.
But I have seen a couple of videos that are coming out of Pokhara. I've spoken to a few friends who live in Pokhara and who were in the protests there too. A lot of politicians' homes have been attacked. A lot of businessmen who have close affiliations with the political parties, their properties have been attacked. Hotels have been burned down. And there too, the police have also been a target.
So I reached out to various people in Kathmandu that I'd been in touch with over the last 2.5 decades. I first went to Kathmandu as a reporter, in fact, in 2001, and have tried to stay abreast and covered the political developments. Although for the last 10 years, as my responsibilities shifted, I was not directly plugged into what was happening in Nepal. So many of my contacts were admittedly from an earlier era. But I spoke to I tried to reach out to some of the people connected to Baburam Bhattarai. First of all, I was anxious to know whether he was okay, and they mentioned that he too was, in a way, being targeted, was having to move to a secure place, and that kind of surprised me because that suggests that the targeting of politicians. I mean, Baburam is not somebody who was directly connected to the current power center. He's kind of been a bit outside the fray, and but there's a sense in which all political parties, right? So there's a frustration with the Nepali Congress, with the UML, with the Maowadis, with the people who left the Maowadis, and there seems to be a general frustration and anger going well beyond simply anger at corruption or anger at lost opportunities. There's a sense in which people are saying, look, this political class as a whole has betrayed us, and it doesn't matter if you were not directly involved in a specific act of corruption or in the shooting of protesters. We've had enough of you. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, yes, it is. Definitely, the entire political class is seen as having been compromised. Even Baburam, yeah, he hasn't been really active in politics like as he used to be for a long time now. But even him, people see that people, their perception is that this man, he was also a prime minister at one time. He was part of the Maoist revolution. He was part of the Maoist party. So by that token, he is also responsible for the state that this country is in today. So all of the politicians across the board are kind of being targeted by these protesters. I don't think anyone really has been spared.
Would you say? I mean, like one of the politicians that I reached out to, I won't take his name because of the sensitivity involved, but he was suggesting that when I said, look, are all politicians and all parties being targeted? And this person suggested that he had not heard of instances of the RPP, the so-called former royalist people being targeted. But he said, look, it could well be that they're not as numerous as the other parties, so that's why we're not hearing about it. But he wondered about whether RPP was being targeted, and he also wondered. He said there was some speculation about some of the monarchist forces. He mentioned Durga Prasad's name, the businessman, former Maoist, who is a kind of controversial character. But he mentioned how he wondered whether Durga Prasad was involved in this in some way. Do you get a sense that the violence is in any way being directed, being pushed or pulled in a certain way, or is it all just spontaneous? Because a lot of what you're describing strongly suggests a high degree of anarchy and spontaneity.
I do think that so the people that I saw doing a lot of the vandalism and a lot of the violence, they were clearly not Gen Z. They were not young people. They were not the people that I saw yesterday at the protest. These were people who had an idea of what to do. So I'm not going to speculate what party they might be from or what faction or who they represent. I don't know. I just don't.
But they were politically hardened people. You got a sense. People who knew.
Yes. Because I don't think that like the kind of violence that was enacted that I witnessed with my own eyes, I don't think anyone can do that and anyone can engage in that kind of brutality. It's one thing to shoot at someone. It's another thing to smash someone's head in with a wooden crowbar or with a wooden piece of, a wooden 2x4. That takes just a different kind of mentality. And I feel like a lot of the people there who were egging him on, who were taking part in the violence, who were targeting the police, they kind of had an idea of what to do, where to go, who to attack. So I do think that there were people in these protests who had some kind of background, who had experience in these protests and how to
that's an important observation you're making, which is that there perhaps is today some method in the madness that we're seeing. What method this is, who is directing it, to what end is still not clear. Perhaps things will get clear as the day proceeds and as we see over the next couple of days. But let's just talk at the level of politics now. We know that the Prime Minister has resigned, and we know that parliament itself was attacked. So there's very little chance of the president being able to put together a new arrangement simply on the basis of the existing parliament or the existing MPs, right? I think given the public anger and the violence that we've seen against politicians as a whole, probably President Ramchandra Paudel will be looking at some different kind of arrangement. And again, based on my conversations with people in Kathmandu, one has heard speculation about the president turning to the army chief, Ashok Raj Sigdale, the general, to restore law and order. And as you have said, the army has been involved in trying to calm things down a little bit, but the army, you also said, at some places were being targeted. And the second name that one has heard in terms of somebody the president may turn to is Balin Shah, the mayor of Kathmandu, a kind of former musician, rapper, not somebody, he himself not a stranger to controversy. Some of the moves and measures he took as mayor of Kathmandu, in fact, made him quite unpopular with the underclass, I gather, with street vendors, hawkers, and so on. But there is some sense in which, if the Gen Z sentiment is still seen as driving protests, and I think we have to put a big question mark on that, then perhaps the name of Balin Shah, which has emerged, may be one way for the system to sort of stabilize. What are you hearing, and what do you think are possible scenarios over the next 48 hours?
I think it looks like none of the current members of parliament or any of the major political parties will be acceptable to the protesters or even the Gen Z. So one of the demands that the Gen Z has had is to form a government that is an interim government, at least, that is led by someone of their choosing. And the Gen Z movement, it's also not it's not a monolith, right? Like, there are a lot of groups, and it's a very decentralized kind of movement. So all of them also, they have their own demands. For a lot of them, yes, Balin Shah is a choice. He remains very popular with the young people, and they see him as someone who is decisive, who takes action, and who is not afraid to say what is on his mind. So he's a premier choice for many. But then there are others, like you said, who don't agree with Balin's methods. The way he's brutalized the street vendors, the squatters in Kathmandu. So a lot of them are not okay with his kind of draconian, almost authoritarian approach to these issues. So they are floating a different name, which is Sumana Shrestha, who is a member of the RSP, the Rashtriya Swatantra Party. She was the education minister for a couple of months.
This is the party of Ravi Lamechhane, huh?
Yes.
Okay.
But she's also a very popular politician in that she's managed to really bring the young people on board. She's very open. She uses social media very well. She's very articulate, and she's very transparent and open about the lawmaking process or what she's trying to do. And that has appealed to this young generation for whom politics and lawmaking were always this kind of opaque process that they never really understood. So Sumana has made it very accessible to them, and they see her as a decent candidate for someone who might be able to lead. So that's another name that's been just making the rounds right now.
Is she an MP right now? The RSP has a small presence in Parliament. Is she one of the MPs of the RSP right now?
Yes, she is one of the MPs. She is not directly elected, but she's from the proportional representation.
Right.
But she's an MP.
So in a sense, it's possible the president may turn to some kind of unorthodox arrangement. I mean, none of these scenarios have been envisaged by the Constitution or the Constituent Assembly, and I'm just going back and imagining, looking at the tortuous discussions which took place, from 2006 onwards, over the minutiae of various things, and today you have a situation that was completely unforeseen. But in a way, the squabbling and the refusal of the old parties to mend their ways has created such a situation. Pranay, I want to ask you, because it's inevitable that people in South Asia and the world, excuse me, are going to make a comparison with the situation in Bangladesh, right? It's within the space of a year, I mean, in fact, we just passed the first anniversary of the upheaval in Bangladesh. It so happens that I was in Dhaka literally about 10 days ago and met many of the young people who were involved in that, met some other politicians, and they are now grappling with, again, a fairly complex transition where you had a movement of young people that, took on the government of Sheikh Hasina. Sheikh Hasina responded with vicious brutality, and that essentially made her ouster inevitable. It crystallized public anger that had been gathering, and she had to flee the country. And since then, you've had the young people, the youth movement, essentially pushing their nominee, in this case Muhammad Yunus, as the sort of interim advisor, so to speak, the de facto head of government. And Professor Yunus has promised to have elections by February 2025. But of course, there the comparisons sort of end, because in Bangladesh, the protests were sharply focused at Sheikh Hasina and her Awami League. And you could say that, in fact, parties that she had targeted for repression during her 15-year rule, like the BNP of Khaleda Zia and even the Jamaat Islami, they were the ones who also got galvanized and mobilized. Although I don't think the uprising was driven entirely by these parties, but they took advantage of it. And so today you have a situation where you have, they can think of having elections with established political parties being in the fray. In Nepal, from what you described, there is a general disaffection against most political parties, perhaps with the exception of RSP. If Sumana Shrestha is one of the names being spoken about, then perhaps public anger towards their party is not so great. But we're looking at a very complex situation where political parties are not going to be able to give Nepal a soft landing. So whatever transitional arrangement emerges is going to have to evolve on its own, and it has to evolve with some sense of authority and enforcement. So it seems inevitable that the army is going to be playing a larger and larger role. So do you foresee a situation where the Nepal army, which has so far, I mean, successive governments, it's hard to imagine the monarchy sustaining itself all those years without the backing of the military. But the military's never been front and center. Do you see a situation where the army now may play more and more of a role?
It could happen because the army has generally kind of stayed outside ever since the end of the monarchy. It's taken a very backseat role. It tries very much not to interfere or not to make very political statements. Can
I just interrupt you for 1 second? Because we are now joined also by Yuvraj Gimire, who's our studio is going to patch him in, veteran journalist who happens to be in Delhi. He came for the funeral of a dear colleague of ours, Sankarshan Thakur, who passed away yesterday. But I will welcome Yuvraj into our chat. But Pranay, please carry on. You were talking about the role of the army. And Yuvraj, welcome.
Thank you.
Hello, Yuvraj.
Hello.
I actually don't I don't want to make a prediction here, but it could happen. It could happen because right now, from what I see, if the Gen Z have a say, they're not going to accept any of the traditional political parties. The only party they might accept is the RSP. And that's because the RSP is much newer. It doesn't have the same kind of baggage that all of the other political parties have. So if the RSP is able to capitalize on this, which Ravi Lamechhane, I hear, is already out of jail and he's being welcomed by huge crowds of people. So there's that. It could be one way for things to go. Or if this kind of violence continues and there is no end in sight, then the army might have to play a stronger role in ensuring that order is maintained and that chaos does not prevail.
Right. Yuvraj, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
You just heard what Pranay was saying. I mean, Pranay and I have been talking for the last roughly half an hour about the situation on the ground, and essentially the what I understand from what he's been saying and from my conversations with people in Kathmandu, is that there appears to be a qualitative difference between the kind of protest that we saw on Monday involving young people, largely focusing on the corruption issue, and of course the social media ban, and today's protest, which seems to be little bit more anarchical, more violent, focusing on the broad spectrum of political leaders. The homes of leaders have been arson. There've been violent attacks on the police, even on journalists, and this has obviously created a vacuum. And I wanted to get your initial sense, Yuvraj Ghimire, of how do you think this vacuum, which has been created now with Prime Minister Oli's resignation, and public disaffection with the political class as a whole, the attack on Parliament, attack on all parties. How is this vacuum going to be filled? What are the likely scenarios that you can think of or that you're hearing?
It is. Yeah, thank you. It looks like it's too early to see how these vacuums would be addressed, especially in the context of almost all the political parties, like losing their credibility and being seen as corrupt, be it in the power or in opposition. But Oli's resignation at the moment has paved the way for seeking some kind of solution. The president just now has accepted the resignation of the prime minister, but as per the constitution, he says this government will continue until further arrangements are made. The point is, a prime minister who is already flayed and who cannot face the public, being asked to continue as a caretaker government only amounts to complicating the situation.
Yes.
So one way would be to call the process, the protesting group, but we really don't have a structured face. And there are no well-known leaders. We don't know whether they are in command of the situation. But only thing is that only way out is to invite political party leaders from different political forces to find a way together. The politics of exclusion is not going to work. But in the kind of violent situation, I guess not only the political forces or the official protesting groups, but different vested interest groups also seem to have joined in. I don't think these violent activities against the leaders, Serbadu, Deuba, to everyone, is basically is something on the agenda of this protesting groups. So I'm very, very unclear about who is in control of the situation.
Right. Do you foresee a situation where, and this is a sensitive question, so you can answer it as you will, but do you foresee a situation where this vacuum might thrust greater power and responsibility into the hands of the Nepal army, because it's their job to ensure law and order to begin with?
Well, this is something even at the height of Maoist insurgency, despite the recommendations of the cabinet led by G.P. Korela and others, the two kings, King Birendra and King Gyanendra, had dissuaded political parties to use army against their own people. But here in the peace exercise, army could be a facilitating platform. At least they reach out to different political forces or groups to find a way out. But I don't see army taking over and ruling the country. Nepal army has not done that in the past, never.
I mean, the Nepal army has always, if you like, backstopped the government of the day, but refrained from directly playing a role. Maybe Katwal was one exception, briefly. Rukmangat Katwal.
Yeah, Katwal's was a very unique case because, Katwal was chief of the army and a cabinet, any cabinet of the day could have sacked the army chief and all that. But that Maoist had done to create a situation, to create a very embarrassing situation for the Nepal army. Like if the Young Communist League and Prime Minister of the day, Prasadda, had sacked the chief and appointed another person they handpicked, that would have mean Nepal army would have been demoralized forever, and it would have been seen as like something under the command of Young Communist League. It was at that stage. Maybe Katwal's own ambition was there, but larger political parties, the key political parties in Nepal,
I think we've lost you. Yuvraj, can you hear me? I think we've lost Yuvraj's audio. Hopefully, our studio will patch him back. But Pranay, do you see? I mean, if we take a long arc, a long range view of Nepal's politics, winners and losers, right? Say over the last 3 decades, Nepal has been through major transition. The monarchy is finished. The sort of monarchical forces, which were once very powerful, are over. Do you see any chance at all of these forces now trying to use this situation to rebuild their own credibility, to restore some kind of a stake, or is that chapter closed, over and done with, as far as the people of Nepal are concerned?
From what I've seen today, I think it's over. Up until yesterday, if they had responded well to whatever happened yesterday, all the tragedy, if PM Oli had resigned, if the Congress had, withdrawn its support for the Oli government, if the Congress, all of the leaders of the Congress had put out a very strong statement condemning what happened, and just like tried to reach out to the Gen Z protesters and showed some kind of empathy and humbled themselves a bit, then maybe we wouldn't be here today. What happened today is because of what they didn't do yesterday. PM only refused to resign. The ministers of the Oli cabinet were giving statements saying, why should the PM resign just because the streets asked him to? That's not how a prime minister resigns. Their arrogance was on display. None of the Nepali Congress too. They did not. They waited so long to put out a statement. The Congress president, Doba, he did not say anything. No one said anything. And that's why anger grew, because people felt like these people really do not care at all about us. When 19 of us have died, have been shot to death, and they can't even be bothered to express a little bit of sympathy for us, why should we accept any of them? So that was kind of the mentality that today, going into today, the protesters, the people on the streets, that's what they were thinking. And given how the violence has escalated and how so many of these leaders have literally been brutalized, they've been physically captured and beaten, I don't think they're coming back. I don't think that, even if they do, it's going to take a very long time.
No, so if UML and the Maoist Party and the Nepali Congress have suffered irreparable loss, my question is, can some of the older forces that were decisively defeated 2 decades ago, the monarchists, for example, could they be dreaming of a comeback? Yuvraj, do you want to take that question? Is there some scope of the royalists looking at this? What remains of the royalists? Gyanendra, RPP, are these elements still active? Can they still try to turn this to their, or is it all water under the bridge?
I think there are all kind of forces active, and monarchy was removed by political parties in 2006. But I'd say that in the process, only 8 leaders decided, especially dominated Maoist, as part of the initiative brokered by India, they insisted for the exit of the monarchy without involving the people. So so that's why monarchy always. And second thing, Gyanendra after the exit didn't leave the country. So, which something nowhere happens, a kind of monarchy removed, lives in that country. Third was the unpopular and corrupt image that political parties kept building for themselves in the past 2 decades. That benefit also went to the monarchy. There are forces. They may be not organized, but they have a force to reckon with. And in the conciliatory process, which alone would lead to some kind of solution in the current situation, they are at least they can play a role and contribute to the peace. Whether monarchy remains there, doesn't remain there, that's entirely for indigenous groups to decide. Monarchy's relevance would have been over if he'd been involved, if the people in general had been involved in the constitution making process and in the peace process.
No, but one could argue
The
that Yuvraj, one could argue that the Constituent Assembly was an elected body after all. I can remember covering those elections, and
yes,
the parties which won an overwhelming majority were the
yes,
parties that wanted the abolition of the monarchy. But I wanted to actually come to you for a different question.
yeah.
Again, before you joined, we were talking about one of the names being floated being that of Balen Shah, and then our friend Pranay in Kathmandu said that Sumana Shrestha's name has also been taken. RSP MP, somebody seen as outside the power structure. Are these names credible names as far as you can
Hello.
understand, people who might be able to head some kind of an interim arrangement?
Well, it's too early to say about that. Yes, Balin was the only one who said he is above 28 and not qualified to be joining this protest group. He hasn't ruled out. There are certain people demanding that he come and
Okay, we've lost Yuvraj's audio. Sadly, we're going to have. Yeah, I think we'll have to come back and with Yuvraj when we have a more stable connection. But Pranay, look, I'm not going to detain you much longer. You have work to do. You're running your newsletter, and you want to cover what's happening in the streets. But just a final word. I know that in Nepal's street politics, there's a lot. Very often India becomes a factor in at various points and moments of transition. People are quick to assume a larger than life role being played by India. Sometimes that assumption is based on facts, because there's plenty of documentation over the past decades of Indian involvement behind the scenes with various leaders and coalitions, and sometimes the assumption of Indian involvement is exaggerated. Are you picking up anything that is there any discussion, any anger on the streets vis-a-vis India, or is this a purely sort of domestic affair, and India is not being seen as involved at all in any way? And if that is the case, that's a good thing. But I just want you to confirm for me that this is indeed the case.
Yes, that's true. I mean, from what I've seen, I have not heard a single slogan against India.
No finger pointing at India right now.
No.
Good. I mean, so that's unusual for Nepali politics, but I suppose that it conveys exactly what the situation on the ground is, and what people's frame of mind is at this moment. The anger with simply the frustration and anger, the lack of positive change over the last 2 decades, and somehow now reaching this very, very volatile stage. And it's something that I hope will find a way to calm down soon without any more violence. Pranay, you've been very generous with your time, and I thank you for joining us. And we will, I'm sure, call upon you and your insights for future programs in the days and weeks ahead. Thank you very much, Pranay, and stay safe. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.